All right, second time's the charm, I guess. This is my second time making this video. So, the moon. I think for early years in my reading tarot life, I struggled to understand the moon practically. Like, I got the idea of it as a concept. It just was hard for me to make sense of in a reading. And even though, in many ways, I still use some of my former interpretations for the card, it took me a minute to unpack what it really represented. And a lot of the solution to that puzzle came down to something that I keep repeating, which is to go back to what the thing really is. To go back to not the esoteric idea of the concept, but the reality of the item in the world we live in. And I did that with the moon. And in so doing, looking at what the moon really is really helped me unpack this card and make sense of it. And I'm going to talk through that today, obviously, and hopefully it will help you. When we think about what the moon really is, we can see that the moon has a huge impact on Earth and life as we know it. The pull of the moon on the oceans is why we have tides. And when we think about how much water is in our bodies, how much we are made of water, it would make sense that the moon's pull would affect us too. And we sort of know that it does. I mean, ERs and law enforcement have known for a long time that when there's a full moon, their activity spikes. And for some reason, I don't know why, I'm the only person who I know that this happens to. When there's a new moon, I cannot sleep, almost like clockwork. For the couple days before or after on a new moon, I cannot sleep. I don't know anyone else who has this problem. It is bizarre, but I have just chalked it up to the moon, and why shouldn't I? Makes total sense. I'm not an astrologer, but I've studied a bit about it, and I've had my chart read by smart people, and I have to tell you that understanding the moon's placement in your birth chart can really open up your understanding of your tendencies, and I'll sort of talk about why. I never really knew much about it. I knew that I was a Leo sun and, all the jokes about Leos. And yeah, I have a lot of Leonine qualities for sure, including the less sort of discussed ones are Leonine insecurity. But it was when I saw my moon and my rising signs in my chart and I understood what those meant and the tendencies of those positions, I started to understand myself in a whole new way. Because I do tend to act in certain ways. I do tend to react to certain situations this way. I do have certain behavioral tendencies that have been part of me my whole life. Maybe they have nothing to do with the fact that I was born where I was when I was, but I think that they do. I think if the moon has such a powerful effect on our planet, why shouldn't the other planets? You know what I mean? It's an argument that I will get into with the sort of what I call left-wing science fundies, who are so progressive that there's no concept of anything other than what they view as science. Even though to me, real scientists are not people who limit their thinking, but are open to thinking. Scientists ask what if, and I think lefty science fundies are like, no, science says this. But we would never have the scientific discoveries we've had if scientists haven't said, what if we try this? What if this were true? I mean, when you think about string theory and theoretical physics, it's a completely unbelievable concept, but scientists are saying this is a distinct possibility. So if that's true, why can't astrology be? I remember getting into a little tiff with someone on social media, and I said, if the moon pulls the oceans, why wouldn't it pull us? And he said, well, you're not an ocean. And I said, yes, I am. Anyway, the point is that when I discovered my moon is in Cancer, I learned a whole lot about how I move through the world emotionally, what satisfies me, what irritates me, what I do to take care of myself, and especially what I do to take care of others, because the moon in Cancer is a very caretakery kind of thing. And I think that's the teacher part of me. I think that's the part of me that loves to cook and entertain for people, the part of me that's going to listen to your problems. It's also the part of me that's going to absorb all your problems and make me want to take it upon myself to fix all your problems, But understanding that helped me to be more thoughtful about how I approach the world. I'm not always good at doing that, but I do know I need to sort of protect myself from sort of absorbing everyone else's issues so that I don't take them on, because I've got my own shit to deal with. Incidentally, if you're curious, my ascendant is in Aquarius, which is also the teacher part of me, but the teacher part of me that does videos like this series where I try to sort of blow up long-held associations or tendencies that I don't think are serving anyone. So, but understanding that part of me really, really just, even if you don't want to become an astrologer, and there's just so much to learn. I told my teacher, I feel overwhelmed. Like I'm too old. I'm never gonna get everything that I need to know in order to be a decent enough astrologer to like do a birth chart, even like in a basic way. But having your birth chart done by someone really smart is an excellent thing to do. I recommend Sheila Haidt. If you don't know her, you can find her on Instagram, and I'll try to remember to link her website below. Anyway, the moon is the thing we're talking about here, Ben. I mean, let's come the fuck on. The moon is one of the clearest symbols of cycles that we have in visible life. I mean, the seasons are cycles too, but they take so long to kind of go. The moon, with its 30-day cycle, is visible. So in 30 days, we can kind of see the cycle of birth and death every month, and right in front of us, right in the sky. And so the moon can represent cycles of any kind, which is one reason why it's often associated with femininity, right? Because of the menstrual cycle, for example. But any kind of cycle could be represented by the moon, and I think that it's a helpful thing, when paired with the death card I talked about, how, or the Wheel of Fortune, how things can go up and down and cycle through, and the moon can really reinforce that. One thing I was thinking when I was making these notes, I've never really done this, but it occurred to me that if you are doing a reading and you're using a really sort of color-rich deck, if you have a lot of darker colors, like dark blues, blacks, dark grays, those sort of darker colors, it could suggest the phase of the moon where it's waning. And if you're surrounded by brighter colors, it could suggest the moon getting brighter or waxing. So that could help you sort of understand where in a cycle you are. And, again, that's never occurred to me until I was making these notes, but why not have it? It absolutely could do that. It's just one of those things that might pop up in a reading. Animals are drawn by the moon. One reason we see animals frequently depicted on the moon card. We have animals on the moon card all the time, sort of braying at the moon, right? And I think that this card can suggest times in our life when we need that, times in our life where we need to sort of connect to that more animal instinct part of ourselves. I've talked about this often in videos, particularly with the devil, and I think the moon and the devil paired this way could really suggest that. You need to listen to your gut, or if you can't hear it, if you can't hear your gut or your instinct or your intuition, maybe it's time to sort of really dig deep and reconnect with that part of you, because we all have it. You know what I mean? It's a safety mechanism that is innately built into the human animal. So maybe it's time to reconnect with that sort of pre-civilized part of yourself that I sort of talked about in the devil video. So the moon, we may need to go howl at the moon. We need to go take a moon bath, whatever. Like reconnect with nature, reconnect with our intuition somehow. Think about what intuition is, and explore that part of yourself. Again, in other contexts, it could mean that you're being sort of too wild. And you need to rein it in. So if there are cards that are sort of asking you to rein something in, it might be that. Swords cards, for example, especially in Marseille with those sort of like curvy cage-like swords, it might say, you know what, like you're being a little wild, rein it a little bit, sort of cage the beast a little bit in order to sort of function, because we live in a post-civilized society. So, you know what I mean. The moon is reflected light, and this was a really big part of my interpretation for a long time, and I still use it. The idea that it's reflected light suggests that we're not seeing things clearly, which has both positive and negative connotations. There are times where we kind of need a dreamy moonscape landscape, where we need like the fairies in the forest, and we need a fairy tale. We need to imagine and have a dreamy, sexy quality to it. You know what I mean? Fantasies and all of that is very healthy. But it can turn into delusion, and we can end up like a cast off from a Tennessee Williams play where we need to be like checked into a spa.
I've always depended on the kindness of strangers.
So we have to be careful about the fine line there. The moon has always been associated with madness too. So the moon and the fool could be a really interesting / dangerous pairing. Because when we did the full video, we talked about how the older associations to that are the madman. And the moon can bring out those qualities of the madman, right? So that's something to be aware of as well. The moon pulls, and so it attracts. And so with cards like the Lovers, the Two of Cups, things like that, there could be a really powerful attraction. There could be a really strong pull. The moon also repels, as does attraction, like the twos. And so you have to sort of see contextually what's going on, because the moon can pull and it can push, which is why we have high and low tides. Some very like fluid motion I'm doing here. Ooh. So the other thing, though, is that the moon and the Lovers could suggest we're not seeing a relationship clearly if we think about the reflected light I was just thinking about before, which happens. When we're new to a relationship, we want to see all the good things in the person. We want to be seductive. We want to be seduced. So that's fine. There are times where we're ignoring big old red flags, and the Lovers and the moon may say, hey, look, red flag. You got to see this more clearly. And in that case, like swords, justice, like cards like that might be the ones saying red flag, because they're kind of cutting through all the the fairy tale stuff and saying you gotta think clearly, you gotta look at this more reasonably. The moon could simply suggest nighttime, especially with when questions, or it could suggest periods of 30 days. You know what I mean? So if you're asking a when question, it could suggest within a month. The moon is dim, so it can soften other cards. Even when the moon is full, it's dimmer than sunlight, right? Because it's reflecting, it's a mirror. So it can soften, if you have a reading that's got like a lot of unwelcome messages in it, the moon can sort of say, okay, it's not great, but it's all right. Like it's gonna be okay-ish. You know what I mean? Whereas the sun sort of really blasts and intensifies things. We'll talk about that next week. And again, the moon is a mirror, so it can reflect anything. So even though we're talking about sunlight and light specifically, the moon can just reflect you back at yourself. And the question is, which is really interesting, whether you can see yourself clearly. And it's a thing that I have struggled with, mostly privately, but I've talked about this a little bit with folks about like whether you can use tarot for things like decolonizing yourself or shadow work, because in order to sort of do those things, you need to be willing to see yourself clearly. Like if I want to use as sort of a cis white man tarot in my sort of anti-racist practice, then I have to be willing to look at myself through a really brutal lens, and the reason why I think that I don't encourage people to use tarot for that is it's easy to just be soft on yourself. It's easy to sort of not be ruthless with yourself, and that's something you have to consider. So the moon kind of asks you, what reflection of you are you really seeing? Is it a funhouse mirror? Or is it the mirror that makes you look ugly in the department store? Or is it like a really fair reflection? And again, other cards in this series are probably going to help you understand that. The moon and the fool, not so much. There's your funhouse mirror. The moon and the magician, probably not so much. It's tricking you. The moon and a lot of swords cards may be very, very clear. So you sort of get that sense. So that's the moon. That's what I have for you this week. We're going to do the sun next week. Where's the moon in the world for you? How do you think about it in day-to-day life? Just beyond sort of the esoteric tarot associations, how do you use the moon if you have to read about what to make for dinner, for example? Maybe the size and shape of the moon suggests you need to get a pizza. Who knows? Take care. Be good. We'll talk soon. Have a good week.